Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, Series 2000. This week, I'm excited to visit Fright Camp. This book looked vaguely familiar to me because of the crazy-looking raccoon on the cover, but I never checked it out from the library. It continues the Goosebumps tradition of solid camp books, even though this one loses some steam by the end. It's really pretty similar to A Shocker on Shock Street, so if you enjoyed that one, you should check it out. Although this 1998 cover has a great-looking feral raccoon on it, I find it kind of odd that this is what they went with. This book has way bigger scares in it, and this raccoon is featured in like half a paragraph in passing. You'd think this camp was full of radioactive woodland creatures instead of being a book about a horror movie themed camp. I didn't find any merchandise this week, but in the back of the book, we have part 3 of the Creepstakes contest, where kids were challenged to finish Stein's story starter and had to use the special words in the back of a handful of Series 2000 books within their story. This week, the 2 words were spider and hammer. I'm pretty sure I read this contest will have at least one more installment. Our front tag says, "Where the wild things are, out of control." Which again makes me think this book will be about dangerous forest animals, but it's not at all. But let's check out the back of the book. I lowered my head and started to swim, slowly, steadily out to the white floating platform. I was 4 or 5 strokes away from it when I felt something wrap around my ankle. At first, I thought it was a piece of seaweed, but then I felt it grip me. I thrashed the water with both hands. Let go, but the hard bony hand held on, tugging me underwater. Okay, let's start this summary. The book opens with an introduction to Andrew and his younger brother Tyler, and they are both R.B. Faraday fanatics. You may be wondering who the hell that is. Well, in Goosebumps, he's a famous horror movie director making such classic films as The Revenge of Dr. Cruel, Carnival of Disgusting Horrors, and Crab Monsters vs. the Leech People. R.B. Faraday feels like a play on cheesy B-movies from the 50s, and also a reference to Stein himself. Andrew and Tyler are having a great day because they just learned Faraday is opening a horror-themed camp called Fright Camp, complete with a haunted forest, lake of water zombies, and cavern of no return. The 2 boys are so excited, they have no idea how they're going to handle waiting all the way until July. Lucky for us, the reader, we get a time jump in the next chapter and are already on the bus to Fright Camp. While riding the bus, the brothers meet some sisters named Meredith and Elizabeth, who are also horror fanatics. Elizabeth is lacking some social graces though, because she keeps popping her bubblegum and getting spit all over Andrew, which is unacceptable. Elizabeth is also finding herself on the outs with this group of kids because she's hopeful that this camp won't be entirely scary and wants some classic camp activities too, which essentially gets her booed by everyone. The bus suddenly comes to a screeching halt as a man dressed in all black forces himself onto the bus. The mystery man overpowers the driver and after a scuffle, tosses the driver out of the bus doors and hijacks the bus full of terrified kids. Everyone is freaking out, but Andrew and Tyler are too stunned to do anything while they wonder where this crazy man is taking them. The bus ride to camp is always wild in Goosebumps. Like, has there ever been a peaceful one? Tyler starts laughing because it suddenly occurs to him that this is exactly what happened in Vacation of Endless Doom, so it all has to be an act. Tyler tries to inform the other kids about this conclusion, but most of them remain uneasy. They approach the camp entrance to cheers from the kids, only to have the driver zip right by it and announce he has other plans for all these kids, causing Tyler and Andrew to doubt their original hypothesis, and they begin to wonder if they're actually being kidnapped. The bus swerves down a gravel road into some dark woods. This really gets all the kids freaked, until they suddenly emerge out into an open green field where a banner declares, "Welcome to Camp Fright." So this really all was an act, but this was pretty obvious even by Goosebumps standards. Some kids are still crying, but most of the kids laugh and cheer at the good news. We get a look at the counselors, and in this book, they all seem to be wearing monster blood green outfits, which seems appropriate for a fright camp. Andrew walks around and discovers this camp really went all out on its theme. He spots multiple carnival rides from Carnival of Disgusting Horrors, including the Spin and Scream ride and haunted go-kart track. This camp sounds like a good time, to be honest. Andrew walks into the main lodge and signs up for some activities like movie appreciation, swimming, and horror poster art. Andrew and Tyler then are assigned to their cabin, where they meet their camp counselor Gus, and learn they have 2 roommates, Jack and Chris, but they're already out exploring the camp. Gus sends the brothers out to have fun, but warns them to stay out of the cavern of no return, because they won't return, which seems self-explanatory really. He also warns them that this camp isn't what it seems, which is also a given in Goosebumps at this point. The brothers march outside and find a sign with even more areas to explore, like the Bottomless Quicksand Pit, Ghost Cabin, and the Mine of Lost Souls. This camp is kind of like a mix of One Day at Horrorland and A Shocker on Shock Street. Before they can start off on an adventure, they hear a boy's agonizing screams. They turn around and find a red-headed boy with his hand stuck in a wasp nest. Andrew tries to pull the nest off, but it won't budge because according to Andrew, the hand must be so swollen from all the stings. But wasp nests are basically paper thin, so I don't think this would be an issue. This all makes sense a paragraph later because while Andrew and Tyler are panicking, the red-headed boy begins to laugh because this was just a prank, bro. The boy introduces himself as Jack, the mystery roommate, and all the kids have a good laugh over the prank. Meredith and Elizabeth appear on the scene, and Elizabeth is very concerned that some of these things in the camp seem real. Jack and Chris confirm that some of the scares at Fright Camp are fake, while others are indeed real, like the quicksand pit. The two boys then share a week before the camp opened. A counselor tripped into the quicksand pit and was sucked to the bottom. This story scares everyone, but it seems like after just getting pranked by Jack, they'd take his story with a grain of salt. Not to mention this camp would be uninsurable if they were killing people off before it even opens. The kids are then all summoned to the mess hall for a camp meeting. Shit gets weird quickly though, because once they're seated at various tables, the kids all have their arms and hands strapped directly to the table so none of them can move. This feels very unsafe, like what happens if there's a fire? Andrew tries to wiggle around in his straps, but is strapped down solid. He also feels the hum of electricity pulsing through the straps, which concerns him. Roommate Chris is in the back of the room, refusing to be strapped down, which causes a group of counselors to surround him. Suddenly, a man in a white lab coat appears in front of the room and introduces himself as Alonzo, the assistant warden. Like these kids are his prisoners or something. Roommate Jack then shouts out demanding to know why they're being strapped down, and Alonzo just declares that between Jack and Chris's behavior, cabin 3 is going to be the lucky cabin, which sounds a little ominous to innocent Andrew and Tyler, who are just minding their own business. Alonzo then gets back on track and introduces the creator of the camp, the famous R.B. Faraday. The kids can't clap, so they all hoot and holler as their hero enters the room. Andrew is surprised that Faraday isn't at all what he imagined he'd be. He's short and scrawny with a bedazzled skull necklace. Faraday gives a welcome speech where we learn this man created 35 horror films, but for his latest project, all these kids are going to be the stars as he brings his horror movies to life. It's pretty on the nose for the plot of this book. Andrew suddenly shouts out wanting to know why they're strapped down, even though it seems smarter to keep your mouth shut at this point. Faraday reveals they're all hooked up to the fear meter from the Revenge of Dr. Cruel, and decides to use roommate Chris as an example. Chris squirms and begs to be left alone, but Faraday punches some buttons on a control panel, and suddenly Chris starts screeching in agony. He thrashes around in his seat as electricity pulses through his body. Faraday stops the electric current briefly, only to fire it back up again to torture Chris some more. Chris is now lying limp at the table, face down and silent. Faraday can't get the shocks to stop and seems to be panicking. Once he gets the machine shut down, he sends Alonzo over to assess the damage. He declares that Chris will live and then hauls his unconscious body out of the room. Throughout all of this, the kids are sitting there silently like, what the fuck is happening right now? Faraday is then like, well, better turn down the voltage for the next group, but Alonzo thinks it's fine where it's at. Faraday then casually mentions how he got Alonzo freshly from prison, and finally a girl in the crowd meekly asks if they can be unstrapped now. Faraday ignores her and orders the counselors to bring in the special guest. Andrew keeps telling himself that this all has to be an elaborate act to get them in the mood for Fright Camp, but is stunned when he sees the special guest, a giant caged gorilla who is not happy to be there. It starts shaking the bars of its cage, baring its teeth and hollering at the crowd, causing some kids to scream. We then learn this gorilla is Rocco from Conquerors of the Gorilla Planet. Faraday informs the crowd that Rocco hasn't adjusted well to captivity and mauled one of his handlers just last week. Then the cage door suddenly swings open because I guess Alonzo forgot to secure it, allowing Rocco to march out into the crowd. Alonzo jumps on Rocco's back, but the gorilla tosses him to the side like he's nothing. Rocco then approaches Andrew's table. All around him, kids are trying in vain to escape, but they're strapped down too tight. Rocco lunges for Andrew, but he's able to dodge his swipe. Rocco moves on to his next target and again misses as he makes his way through the room. Some counselors come bursting in with a tranquilizer gun and end up rendering Rocco unconscious. Faraday assures the kids that Rocco isn't dead, but the kids don't particularly seem to care. He then orders the counselors to unstrap the kids as he gleefully tells them all to believe in terror. And all the kids march out of the mess hall, unsure of what they just experienced. Back at the cabin, Tyler is thinking maybe they should go home because this camp is too scary, even for a horror enthusiast like himself. But Andrew reminds him that they can't because their parents are on vacation until August, so they'll have nowhere to go. Roommate Jack enters the cabin and reports he just visited Chris at the nurse's station, and it's not good news. Chris is alive, but talking nonsense because all that electricity seemed to fry his brain. The boys make a pact to stick together, but then spot Alonzo peering through the window because he's been listening this whole time. Alonzo vanishes and the boys hear cries outside the cabin door. They go outside to spot Chris running frantically across the field with counselors in hot pursuit. He's making ungodly noises and begging them to let him go, and he promises to never tell what he saw. This really scares Andrew and Tyler, and they watch solemnly as the counselors finally catch Chris and haul him away. Later that night, Chris has returned to the cabin 3, trembling all over and refusing to talk about what he experienced. The next morning, it's raining, so all the kids end up watching scary movies until lunch. After lunch, it's sunny, and Andrew and Tyler finally have free time. Their counselor Gus suggests they try out the spin and scream ride, which both kids don't even hesitate to try. Given the earlier events of this book, I would want to see somebody else ride it first before my ass got on it. At the ride operator Duffy is notable because he's apparently jacked and wearing a tight red muscle shirt and tight black spandex bike shorts. What is it with Stein putting characters in spandex bike shorts? I have zero memory of this ever being a thing in the 90s. Every time he does it, it makes me laugh. On the ride, Andrew counts 12 cars, and each car has its own wheel to adjust the spin speed. I'm kind of picturing it being like the teacup ride at Disney World. The ride starts out pleasant enough at an okay speed. Tyler doesn't really like rides, so he's already feeling kinda sick. Duffy yanks the lever down as far as it will go, resulting in this car spinning out of control. Screams of joy turn to screams of terror, and Duffy just casually walks away from the control panel and over to the main cabin, leaving all these kids spinning at full speed. It doesn't take long for the vomit count to become relevant because Andrew watches in disgust as a kid sends a balloon of yellow vomit into the air, followed by another kid spewing yellow. Andrew starts to feel his lunch coming up too when he spots Duffy. Duffy calmly begins to pull the lever up, but Andrew is filled with dread when the lever snaps in half. At this point, Tyler is passed out from dizziness, leaving Andrew to hold him in the spinning car in case his limp body gets launched out. The ride starts to slow down, and Andrew spots Duffy holding a cord in his hand because I guess he unplugged it. The kids all stumble out of the ride, and Meredith angrily tells Duffy she's going to report him to Faraday, and Duffy is just like, go for it, because in the movie version of this ride, everybody's spun until their skin peeled off. While walking away, Andrew notices a camera perched in a tree and thinks they're being filmed on the ride. On the way back to the main lodge to complain to Faraday, Andrew is startled by a head in a trash can that actually ends up being the raccoon, just like on the cover of the book, and that's all this raccoon has to do with the story. Once outside Faraday's office, Andrew, Tyler, Meredith, and Elizabeth are all startled when they hear screams of pain coming from behind the closed door. Andrew decides to knock anyways, and Mr. Faraday opens the door a crack to see who's interrupting him. They notice Faraday is bright red and covered in sweat, so Lord knows what this man was up to in there. Andrew asks if he's okay, and he responds, just cooking up some movie magic, which can be interpreted in a variety of ways. Andrew wants answers, so he pushes the door open and spots two creatures hunkered at the back of the office. Were they human? Were they animals? They had round, bald heads as green as melons, tiny black eyes above long lizard snouts, fat green bodies with bulging bellies. They lowered their head and made loud snuffling sounds. Were they crying? I gasped again when I saw their arms and legs were chained to the wall. Faraday threatens Andrew that he shouldn't have done that and warns me he's about to find out what Fright Camp is really about. The story jumps to dinner in a mess hall, and we have a brief food fight scene. I've experienced exactly one food fight as a kid, and it lasted all of 10 seconds, and the entire school lost their field day for like 3 kids throwing food at each other. Teachers don't mess around with that shit. That night, the camp watches The Cavern of No Return, where a group of teenagers slide deeper into a cave, explore a bit, and then realize they have no way of getting out, plus that they're no longer alone in the dark. It kinda sounds like The Descent. After the movie, they all walk back to the cabin, and Andrew spots more hidden cameras that seem to be filming their every move. Then, while trying to fall asleep, the entire cabin is startled by wild animal howls outside. Andrew peers out the window and spots the creatures from Faraday's office out on the hilltop howling at the moon. The story then abruptly moves away from this, and we're at breakfast time the next morning, where Andrew learns only Cabin 3 saw the creatures the previous night. He decides to go for a swim at the Lake of Water Zombies, where Duffy from earlier just so happens to be the lifeguard. We then learn this little water area is based off a movie where a bunch of people drowned and came back as zombies. Despite this knowledge, Andrew hops right into the water, where he's quickly attacked. At first, I thought it was a piece of seaweed, but then I felt it grip me. Cold, hard fingers tightening around my ankle, then tugging me down. Hey, I cried out in protest. I kicked hard. I thrashed in the water with both hands. I sucked in a deep breath. Let go. I squirmed and kicked, but the hard, bony hand held on, tugging me underwater. I shot both hands up, reaching as if I was trying to grasp the surface, but I felt myself pulled down. Kicking, thrashing, I spun around underwater and saw it, a horrifying figure, all bone and torn skin. Bones grasping my ankle, green skin floating loosely off a bony chest. Its head was lowered as it held onto me, pulling me deeper underwater. I spun and kicked and struggled. My chest felt ready to burst. My heart pounded as I stared through the murky water and stared at the undead creature, at the ribbons of flesh floating off the bones. I thrashed my arms wildly, bent my knees, and kicked with all my strength. But it held on, and then it slowly raised its head to me. In a panic and a cold horror, I stared at the green bloated face. Stared at it. Jack's face. Seeing Jack's face is a fun little twist I didn't see coming. Zombie Jack eventually lets go of Andrew, and he's able to quickly swim back to shore before any other zombies can grab him. He tries to warn people about the zombies, but they all look at him like he's crazy. Meredith and Elizabeth end up walking him back to the cabin after he refuses to see the nurse. He kind of just left his brother at the lake. I'm pretty sure I would not leave my sibling behind if I was almost just drowned by a zombie. When Andrew reaches the cabin, he spots a message scrawled on the cabin wall in red paint that reads, "The horror is real. Get away while you can." The story then jumps to lunchtime, and Andrew is trying his best to tell somebody about all the shit that's been happening to him. His counselor, Gus, is nowhere to be found, so he ends up talking to a counselor named Claire, who tries her best to calm him down. She won't fully come out and say that the scares at Fright Camp are real, but does remind Andrew that Faraday believes horror has to be real to be scary. Andrew then overhears Chris and Jack talking and decides to confront Jack about the zombie lake situation, but Jack doesn't seem to know what Andrew is talking about. Andrew insists that these two seem to know more than they're letting on, and they just respond, "It's too late, it's already begun, there's nothing we can do about it." Before they can say anything more, Alonzo appears, which results in Jack and Chris promising him that they didn't say anything. Alonzo dismisses them all, and we hop to dinner time, where they're eating some sort of mystery meat stew. Andrew reflects on his stay at Fright Camp so far, and realizes he isn't having any fun. Real scares or not. He wants to call his parents to pick him up, but he knows they're off in Australia with no way to pick him up. He finally tells himself there is true evil in this camp, or he wouldn't be feeling this way. Alonzo appears in front of the cafeteria with an important announcement. Apparently, the chef accidentally used some poisonous mushrooms in 2 of the dishes, and if the stew tasted odd, it needs to be reported immediately. The kids all joke that all of their stews tasted funny, until Jack and Chris double over in pain. Chris and Jack are always getting it in this book. Andrew begs Alonzo to help them, but he just says it's too late as the 2 kids twitch on the floor. This is the tipping point for Andrew and Tyler. They decide to race out of the cafeteria with Meredith and Elizabeth, but guards block their path. The campers are then all rounded up by security and taken back to their cabins for the night. While lying in his bunk, Andrew declares he's never going to watch a Faraday movie again, and then he hears a sound in the ceiling. He looks closer and spots a hidden camera recording them inside the cabin. This is all starting to feel like a Truman Show horror camp. Andrew looks out the window and sees guards marching all around the campground, so escape is starting to feel impossible. He drifts off to sleep, but is awoken by scraping sounds, followed by a thud. Andrew spots the light of a flashlight, and then a mystery person quickly leaves the cabin. Tyler flicks on the cabin light and sees that somebody stole all of their shoes. Given the build-up in this scene, I was expecting something scarier than that. The boys then hear cries of the other campers all discovering that somebody stole their shoes as well. The kids all conclude their shoes were taken to stop them from escaping because the forest is too dangerous to traverse barefoot. Jack and Chris reappear and inform everybody they had their stomachs pumped. They pull Andrew and Tyler aside and warn them they overheard the counselor's plan for Cabin 3. They plan on scaring the kids to death, along with Meredith and Elizabeth since they're friends. Chris reports he heard Faraday talking about this experiment because he wants to see how much fear one person can handle before they keel over. Jack then lets them know he was able to call his mom at the nurse's office, and she should be there in the morning to help them all escape. The guards chase everybody back into their cabins, but in the light of the cabin, Andrew spots something suspicious. He can see a metal chip behind both Chris and Jack's ears and demands to know what Faraday did to them, but the 2 boys seemingly have no idea what Andrew is talking about. It jumps to the next morning, and I guess Andrew is just going to ignore the microchip stuff because he's still hoping to catch a ride with Jack's mom. At breakfast, Alonzo appears to tell the kids that the guards took all their shoes for their own safety, but the kids are pissed and start throwing breakfast at him. The guards are busy defending Alonzo when everybody freezes at the sound of a high-pitched scream. Jack realizes it's his mom and races out after her. The boys then spot Jack's mom in the quicksand pit after the guards seemingly tossed her in it. She's already waist deep and sinking fast. The kids scramble to find a rope or a branch for her to grab onto, but for some reason, Andrew decides to go get Faraday for help. Because yeah, he's been so helpful this entire book. It makes no sense for Andrew to do this, but whatever. We're approaching the end of the story and need to wrap shit up. Andrew reaches Faraday's office just in time to spot the man taking off in his car. Andrew then sees a note on Faraday's desk that reads, "I can't do this. I can't do this to these kids. I feel so guilty. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, everyone." He is then interrupted by Alonzo, who reminds Andrew that it's rude to read other people's mail. Andrew tries to tell Alonzo about Jack's mom, but learns Alonzo is the one that tossed her in the quicksand in the first place. He then tells Andrew he'll be joining the other troublemakers in a place they can't escape. Some guards grab Andrew and then proceed to haul him up to the cliffs where they approach a dark cave. He spots a sign that says, "The Mine of Lost Souls," and then is tossed into the cave and tumbles into what feels like a bottomless pit of darkness. He realizes he's been tossed down an old mine shaft and can't see shit. He quickly runs into his brother Tyler, along with Meredith, Elizabeth, Chris, and Jack, who reveals his mother didn't make it out of the quicksand pit. This little reunion is interrupted by a low animal growl from the darkness. Chris remembers he found a lighter and quickly flicks up the flame, resulting in the entire room suddenly becoming brightly lit. Andrew looks around him and realizes he's on a stage of some sort, surrounded by an entire room of staff, including Faraday. They all burst into applause, and Faraday starts saying how wonderful they all were, and thanks Chris and Jack for their great performance. Jack pulls off the microphone behind his ear and shares it was a radio that he was being fed lines and instructions from. We learn that Duffy, Alonzo, and Jack's mom were also actors. Jack and Chris were assigned to terrify whoever they ended up in Cabin 3 with. Apparently Meredith and Elizabeth weren't on this either, and Andrew angrily confronts Faraday because he can't believe this was all fake. Faraday says, well, it wasn't all fake, but won't elaborate on what was real. Faraday is then like, well, go enjoy the camp. Your part in the documentary on real fear is over. The 4 kids sulk out of the mine and end up hanging out by the lake, where they lament how terrible this experience was. They're plotting a protest when they're interrupted by Alonzo, who's glaring at them strangely. There's about 15 pages left, so I'm sure we're in for another twist, but not yet I guess, because this Alonzo scene goes nowhere, and we have a few pages of the kids just having fun at camp. At dinner, Andrew's enjoying some hot dogs when he notices Tyler's missing. He confronts Faraday, who suggests they check the cabin together, where they find the cabin in a complete mess like a struggle had taken place, which seems to concern Faraday. It's feeling pretty obvious that the kids are going to stage a scare on Faraday, but what do I know? Meredith bursts into the cabin and declares that Elizabeth is missing too, so Faraday assembles the counselors to form a search party. They check the beach, but all they find is Elizabeth's swimsuit. The spin and scream suddenly kicks on, and when they reach it, they find nothing but Tyler's clothes on a slowly rotating ride. Faraday appears freaked out and declares he's calling the police, but when he reaches his office and attempts to dial out, the phone is dead. Andrew and Meredith accuse him of trying to film more of his documentary, but he denies this and insists he has no idea what's happening. Again, this feels painfully obvious that it's revenge from the kids, and it's really being dragged out. Suddenly, Alonzo appears and reports he thinks he found the kids in the cavern of no return, and Faraday's like, how the hell did they end up there? They all race to the cavern, which is a small low opening in a mountainside that requires them to crawl and squeeze into the small opening. Faraday's like, no, wait, this is too dangerous, but it's too late. Meredith and Andrew squeeze into the hole, where they then immediately slide down a steep hillside. Once at the bottom, they can see flashlights of Faraday and Alonzo following after them. They hear a strange sound in the dark, which frightens Faraday, but when they shine their lights in the darkness, they spot Tyler and Elizabeth, who shout, surprise. Because, yep, this was all an elaborate plan to scare Faraday and Alonzo back. Shocker, I know. We still have 2 pages left though, so there's another twist on the horizon. As the kids are celebrating their victory scare, Faraday still looks concerned because he reminds them that some things at this camp were real, and that this cavern is actually the entrance to a giant wasp nest. The kids start to panic as the hum of bees grows louder and louder. Andrew screams how this can't be happening, and then trips over a speaker because, in a last page twist, Faraday got the last scare after all, with one last prank on the kids. Overall, I thought Fright Camp was a pretty good time for the majority of the book. The story really kind of nosedives once it's all revealed to be Faraday's reality horror movie, which itself was pretty obvious. Despite this, the story still had fun sequences, like electrocuting Chris, Rocco's escape, the spin and scream, and water zombies. I was just hoping it would go in a less obvious direction. I'm still going to give this one 4 out of 5 gorillas. I really liked the detail that went into the different themed settings in this one. As far as the vomit count goes, the spin and scream provided effective with 2 kids losing their lunch on it. Special shout out to calling it a yellow balloon of vomit. That was gross. This raises our Series 2000 total to 9 vomits. Well, that's it for Fright Camp. This book felt like an improvement on A Shocker on Shock Street in some ways, but also not up to the Goosebumps Camp standard. Next week is Are You Terrified Yet? This is another where the cover looks familiar, but I don't think I ever read it. The title is kind of lame though. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Fright Camp. Did this hold up to the camp books of the original 62? How would have you ended this story? Were Andrew and Tyler's parents in on this whole thing? Also, what did you think of my camp horror clips this week? A camp theme always provides some solid clip options. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,